I've been with companies that were at various different stages, larger companies, smaller companies, hardware to very software and AI. From the business perspective, not chasing any shiny object, not chasing trends. We have a tendency to exaggerate what can be done in the short terms, and we lead to a lot of disappointments. So in the area of agents, there's a lot of overhyped claims that are being made, but fundamentally, agents are at the very high level as an applications that are autonomous. They can make decisions on their own. They can course correct and accomplish tasks. People are saying automation is an outdated term these days. A lot of over focus on some of the terms, overemphasizing that point to be able to miss the big picture.
So Farshid, what would you say is the big picture?
We are going toward a very glorious world in terms of productivity. It used to take a lot of efforts to be able to build products. Much easier to be able to do this. Much faster to be able to do this. But still, fundamentals of business models, the fundamentals of talents are correct.
Farshid, looking across your career from your early days to now running Corvic, what's been your single biggest learning moment that you'd say fundamentally changed how you approach building companies today?
I've been with companies that were at various different stages, larger companies, smaller companies, particularly when companies were being formed. And I was also had the privilege to be with companies that are hardware to very software and AI. From the business perspective, not chasing any shiny object, not chasing trends. Obviously, trends are important, but what I mean is that particularly these days, we see a lot of different talks and pundits coming up with opinions that are not necessarily are grounded in realities, right? Chasing after those, it could lead you in the wrong directions. And I have those in my career as well. Lessons that I got from building a company as an entrepreneur.
When you say not chasing, as you said, the hype in the market perhaps, or the shiny lights that you see in the market, what are the specific examples that you can share with us?
These just want to ground it in right now the zeitgeist of today with AI. Remember that when this thing started, 2022, 2023, there have been a lot of different changes. People were saying is that you have to build your own model to be able to stand out against others. There was a lot of ideas about how to make sure to use a specific kind of hardware, whether it's GPU or specific ones, to be able to make sure that you really are, you know what you're doing. A lot of different aspects. Prompting was very important. These days is agentics and everybody using those terms. So I think there's some fundamental aspects are correct. But I think is that if it doesn't apply to your core business, it might not be necessarily the right move for you. Those are some of the examples I can give.
I like that. I like what you said there. And you're right. I mean, if I look back in 2022 and 2023, when AI effectively, this new market shift began, there was conversations around building your own models. There was various different iterations of what you had to do. Now, the thing that we keep hearing in the market is all about agentic AI and automation. Is that your perception as well of this market shift? Ultimately, after the last couple of years, does it really just come down to agentic AI is the shift in the market?
So I think, first of all, fundamentally, besides all the noise that we see around us, we are moving in the right directions, that the productivity gains that we have seen from using the models, from using AI is undisputable, right? We see this. So in the area of agents, I think is that there's a lot of over claims that are being made. But fundamentally, agents are, if you look at it at a very high level, as an applications that are autonomous, they can make decisions on their own, they can course correct and accomplish tasks, right? For that aspect, absolutely, we see that very well. And people are saying automation is an outdated term these days. But definitely, and this is one of the areas that we see is affecting a lot of different areas of software or hardware aspects of the business. Definitely, that's true. But my point is that a lot of over focus on some of the terms used to be, again, prompting, then it was RAG, then it was context and memory. And, now is the agentic approach, which I think all of them have the nugget nuggets of truth are there, are very important, but overemphasizing that point to be able to miss the big picture. That's the area that I'm taking from all of these.
So Farshid, what would you say is the big picture?
I think the big picture, we are going toward a very glorious world in terms of productivity. It used to take a lot of efforts to be able to build products. Much easier to be able to do this. Much faster to be able to do this. But still, I think fundamentals of business models, the fundamentals of talents are correct. I think that we are going toward the world that things are going to be a lot more efficient. So a lot of the work that we used to be mundane work that it was done by us, it will be less work. So you can think about code development. Definitely documentation, something that software engineers dreaded. It can be done a lot easier with a lot pain and ease. We are moving toward that world, and it's going to make our life a lot more efficient. I'm particularly in the enterprise B2B, but obviously in the consumer world, we see that a lot more. We can actually do a note taking, we can learn languages a lot faster, a lot of different aspects, our calendaring, our email organizations, all of that aspect. But definitely things are moving toward those directions. But the thing is that we always in technology, I've seen it with autonomous driving. I've seen it with head-mounted displays. We have a tendency to exaggerate what can be done in the short terms, and we lead to a lot of disappointments with people. But at the end, this is a very different kind of productivity that we're seeing with AI and models that have been unleashed on us.
Yeah, I agree. There's an interesting thing I wanted to uncover with you today on this podcast. And we think about the scale of how fast things are happening now. And I speak to many founders who are saying that speed is key now because you can build faster. Productivity, as you said, has increased significantly. As a founder building a startup today, when you compare it to prior startups you were at before the AI shift, when you think about scale, one thing that I love to hear from founders and CEOs is the decisions that you make, especially the ones where you say no. When you think about new product features, customer requests, maybe even requests from your team or your investors, what would you say have been the hardest no's you've really had to push for when you could have easily said yes?
Yeah, so in my respective area, I'm going to talk about very techie terms, so hope it will come across because I wanted to share my personal experience. I'm in a B2B enterprise business. That means that we work with big companies that they do wonderful things, from healthcare to banking and financial institutions and retail and industrial and so forth. My experiences have been that there are various different ways to be able to build companies and generate revenue. A lot of them are wonderful, a lot of them are great. The ultimate goal I wanted to accomplish was to build a product, not a service. I wanted to build something that is scaled as opposed to dealing with large number of companies that I can closely work with. So that was the ultimate goal, and it comes from the experiences I've had in the past. So along the line, we have been steered away by some companies, and these are wonderful companies, brand names, but they had very specific way to be able to implement their business. In our business, there's a cloud base and there is an on-prem, for instance. Cloud means that, we put something on AWS or Azure, Microsoft or Google, and then the scale is something that we benefit from. There are some companies that are still uncomfortable with that concept, and they were pushing us toward the direction as that we can actually have a very successful business if this could be on our very private environment. And I think at one point, any company might have to deal with this because that's part of winning big whales in what is known in the B2B enterprise world. In the beginning, our thought was that if we go down that path, then it will be harder to scale. Let's build a machine that is scalable. We can address numerous number of companies. Then we can decide we want to address this specific market and with this specific implementations that we have. And it has been very painful. A lot of people that have been advising, they were very disappointed with this kind of approach toward that, because for companies, growth and revenue and validation means a lot. So that was one of the more decisive no's that we had to do from the business perspective. And there are many, many others.
That's an interesting one. So you're saying that you potentially landed a POC or a customer who liked the product, wants to use the product, but wanted it on-prem as opposed to in the cloud. And your decision was tempting because it's a customer, and I get it. As a startup, you want to get off the ground as fast as possible. You want that validation, as you said, but you said, no, I love this because look, I've had a number of founders and investors on the show. I had Bob Movidius on the show, who ran Snowflake, who used to work under Bill Gates. And we sat down and had a very thoughtful conversation around the power of no and discipline. In fact, I had Clark Golestani as well, who was at one point when he was at Merck as CIO, was speaking to Bob at Snowflake in the early days, and he wanted to buy the product. And he said, look, we're ready, but Bob kept saying no. And when I had Bob on the show, I asked him, I said, where did that come from? That discipline to say no. And he said it came from Microsoft, working with Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates. It's a very powerful word to say no as a founder, as an investor, because you're easily tempted to go with the yes because you think it's the right thing. But for you personally, Farshid, where does that discipline and conviction come from to say no to a customer?
First of all, I have a world of respect for Bob and Clark. Wonderful people, very accomplished, and both very accessible to be able to work with. The validation means a lot. For me, I have been very fortunate to work with wonderful people in the industry. My bosses, Sanjay Mehrotra, we were at SanDisk together. He's at Micron, an incredible person. Dr. Eli Harari, who was at SanDisk, again, one of the greatest entrepreneurs. Orton, we were together at Aptina in the past, and Remy Loazon, who was at TI, and then later on we were together at Movidius. I've seen it with them and a lot of other wise people, that art of saying no and how difficult it is, and living with the consequences of that. But for me is that I had seen patterns of that before. That is important. What does it mean? It comes back to the fundamental. What is the ultimate goal that I have as a business person to want to accomplish that? Does this really help for the long term? And for startup, long term has a very loaded word, obviously, because long term, 1 quarter, long terms maybe half a year, as opposed to for big companies, things that would be different. So again, it was a lot of the training that I had gone through being wise people and seeing the consequences of those no's and how in the long term affected the business. And some of them actually, I remember that those decision no's have been very painful for immediate terms, but they truly believed in that aspects, and we came at a consensus that this was the right decisions and we had to do it. So for me, that was a good schooling for me.
I want to move on to a different topic in the realms of building a startup, and that's around hiring and building a team. As you know, that's my trade. Recruiting is an area that I specialize in, especially within engineering. As somebody who's building today, when you think about the companies and even the people you just mentioned now who you've worked alongside, all the different organizations you've been part of, the different startups you've been part of, when you think about today at Corvic, with AI, with all the shift, with productivity, what specific things do you look at now when you look at hiring that perhaps you weren't looking at before, maybe even before Corvic, but more specifically before this AI shift? What has changed now when it comes to hiring?
So there's some fundamentals still the same. The same is that particularly for a startup, you're starting something new. You don't have time to trial and error. The team, the core team, has to be the ones you had experience working together. You may get lucky, bring somebody on board, particularly at the higher up levels, but usually it takes iterations to be able to build, consensus, to have a same approach toward problem solvings and work ethics and all of those matters. In the beginning, I think is a must that you have to have pull from the network of the people you have worked with. As the company grows or as a need arises, obviously you find areas that you might bring some talent that is outside of the network that you have. For that, obviously, then working with various different aspects is that through the networks, making sure there is very crisp and clear about what the job that we are looking for is, very crisp and clear what kind of persona, what kind of talent we are looking for. Validation of those skills through the networking and check-in is really easy to fall in love with somebody who really you don't know that much, and it's come from a brand name, whether it's the place that they have worked with, and later on you found out you really didn't do your homework before bringing people. But at the same time, more professional settings, more senior type of environment, more specialized, there are resources outside organizations that actually help with those. They have a track record of finding the right people. Reaching out to those are extremely important as well. There's so much you can do from your LinkedIn networks or your personal networks to be able to reach out. And you want to bring the best, not compromise on that. So those are the things that work for me.
Farshid, just finally, I want to ask one last question. It's one that I think it's an important one. Every CEO makes scaling mistakes. Everything from potentially hiring the wrong person, something we were just talking about right now, especially for a critical role, perhaps even moving too fast or too slow on the infrastructure, maybe even misjudging the capacity of your team. What has been the biggest scaling mistake you feel you've made in your career? One that had serious ramifications that perhaps now when you look back at, you think, yeah, I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah, so as I said, that the lesson that I said about DevOps means that going after on-prem as opposed to scale. It was a big painful lesson learned from my previous company. You go after the short-term gain, after brand name, all your board members are very excited about this, but then you pay for that later on. This was a very painful lessons that I learned. As far as mistakes, I wanted to tell you this, I make mistakes every day. Some of those can be course corrected very quickly. Some of those has longer lasting impressions. Question is that we all make that mistakes. That's part of learning. How quickly you can recover from it, and what are the consequences of those mistakes before you make those decisions, right? If there's something that you cannot get out of it very quickly, recover from it very quickly, you need to be more thoughtful about making those decisions. Things that it could be addressed very quickly, there's no reason to be able to put too much analysis on top. I do make a lot of mistakes, and I have made a lot of mistakes, but the ones about scaling, that was the more fundamental that I've learned. I made a mistake and I've learned from it.
Love it. Farshid, it really has been a pleasure having you on the show. I want to wrap up with one last question that we ask every single guest we've had on the show, and it's one around a book recommendation. So I was wondering, what would be a book that you've read, or perhaps even one that maybe you're reading right now that has truly resonated with you over the years, and one that you go back to or you take some really hard lessons from that have guided you, have been a beacon of light for you throughout your career?
It's unfortunate I'm not able to read a lot of books these days as much. I've become very lazy to give models to be able to summarize books and summarize things for me, which is a wrong thing, and I should spend time in reading. But some of the books that I could tell you about that actually had the grateful impact are a lot of great writers. But the one sticks with me as a startup founder, as an entrepreneur. Michael Collins and all these people have wonderful, wonderful books. But particularly one sticks with me is that's Hard Things About Hard Things. That is something... Yeah. I thought is a personal experience. Every line of that book resonated with me. I've gone through that. The pain that I felt, I thought it was very well thought about. 0 to 1 is also another good one, book that it was actually, I loved it. That the Hard Thing About Hard Things is something that I tell everybody to read it before starting a company. Even to start a company, read that. It's a very valuable thing.
Oh, that's great. And it's written by two very successful Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and investors, so I really appreciate those ones. And interesting enough, the Hard Thing About Hard Things has been recommended the most on this podcast. So,
oh really? Okay, so
yeah, Farshid, it has been a real pleasure. Honestly, thank you so much for making the time to be on the show, and all the success with Corvic. Love to do this again in person sometime in the future.
Thank you so much, appreciate it. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Farshid. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Inside the Silicon Mind. This podcast is powered by Harrison Clark. For more episodes, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. As always, stay curious, stay consistent, and stay inside the Silicon Mind.